What's up, everyone? So, first of all, I want to apologize for how long it's been since I've been uploading videos on YouTube. It's been a good few weeks now. I typically try to one every week, but I've been very busy the last few weeks between my finals of my education, planning a wedding party, and I was traveling a bit. So, I am back now. Hopefully, for the next few weeks, I will be uploading consistently. And today, I want to discuss kind of my thoughts on Generation 8 monotypes right now, and honestly, why I'm pretty bored of the meta as it stands. So I'm going to be breaking down the usage of the types in the Generation 8 monotype tier based on certain thresholds in the ladder. So we have 1100, 1500, 1630, and 1760 ELO. So kind of four different bands that players will be playing at, and kind of looking to see what types are used a lot in those bands in the ladder. If you've ever seen any of my tier list videos before, you'll know that all types definitely aren't created equal. I understand that. Unfortunately, that's just not the case for pretty much any competitive meta. Not everything is going to be completely the same. So on the screen here we have the breakdown of the Generation 8 monotype ladder at 1000 ELO. So for people who don't understand what the ELO is, this is basically the beginning of the ladder, or a low ladder essentially. We can see here the type breakdown is much what I expected. We see water and steel quite high. I was surprised to see Ghost in top 5, but I suppose Ghost is kind of getting better and better in Generation 8. But towards the bottom as well, we have the usual suspects: fighting, grass, rock. A lot of these kind of correlate fairly heavily towards the tier list I would have done previously. Ice being top 6 is quite surprising, and ground being bottom 4 is quite surprising, though I do think ground is kind of a hard type to play. What really surprises me here is we see flying quite low down around the middle usage. Well, it would be surprising for a high level player, because I do think flying is probably the best type in the game at peak performance, but it is a very tough type to play, so I understand why maybe a lot of people beginning their monotype journey wouldn't necessarily use it. So this isn't the worst distribution ever. In an ideal world, every type would have about roughly 5.55% usage if every type was used equally. Obviously, that's never going to be the case. But looking at this, it's not the worst. We do see a lot of water and steel taking up a significant portion, but it's manageable. And the standard deviation we have here is about 1.769, which is okay. It's fine. It's manageable. But if we jump then into the 1500s, which is probably going to be a lot of what I'm focusing on in this video, and the reason I'd be focusing a lot on this particular band is I think this would be kind of typically where I would play most of my matches. Most of my teams are around the 1500 point on the ladder. It's kind of the point I strive to get every type, every generation, just to say I've played them a decent bit. And we can see here that water is being used even more than previously. It's had a decently significant jump up, as well as steel. So we can see the kind of top tiers here are becoming more and more used, and the bottom tiers are becoming slightly less used. So there already is going to start to be a slight power imbalance here between the top tiers and the bottom tiers. The top 5 as well: water, steel, dragon, bug, and ghost, do make up a fairly significant portion of the entire meta. Over 40% of the entire meta is used up by 5 types, which is not great. So you can see why this might be a bit boring to play. I start to fight the same teams over and over again, and these are the April statistics. I do think going forward, the May statistics, when they come out, I've recorded this video actually prior to the 1st of May, so I haven't seen the May statistics yet, but I do reckon steel is going to be quite a lot higher. I think I fought a lot of steel over the past month or so. So I will come back and talk more about the 1500 kind of towards the end of the video. I want to go over 1630 and 1760 before, just to kind of show the trend that we're going down. So here on the screen we can see the 1630, and water has actually finally stopped being the most used and has seen a significant drop in usage, actually down to about 7.6%, down from about 9.2% previously. Unfortunately, as I was discussing there briefly about potentially the May statistics, we do see a lot more steel, and it's just shy of hitting 10%, which is a lot. When you consider there's 18 types, almost 1 in 10 games is going to have a mono steel, which is honestly very boring because I find Steel a very frustrating and honestly quite boring type to play against, especially given the types I like to play, like Rock, for example, in the high ladder. It just struggles a lot because we're going to see so many Steel types. As well as that, we actually start to see Flying finally come into fruition here. It's the second most used and had a massive jump up. It was about 5.6% usage of 1500, and now it jumped to 8.7%. So we instantly see here going into the higher ladder, Flying becoming a lot better, which kind of solidifies what I said earlier. I think Flying is probably the best type in the game at the moment. However, I think it's difficult to play for beginners to intermediate level players, and for that reason, I don't think we see it a huge amount early in the ladder. I'm still quite surprised to see Ghost so high. I guess it's just I never kind of took to playing Ghost so much, so I wouldn't have thought it's amazing, but it's a solid type. And we actually do see Fire here in the top 5, which is kind of surprising given how strong Water is, but it also not too surprising given how strong Steel is. So we do see a lot of players here probably trying to try and counter the Steel that is quite highly used up here in the top ladder. Or in the high ladder, I should say. So here the standard deviation is taken quite a big jump to 2.438, which is significantly higher than 1.88 we saw last time in 1500. And we can see as well the low tiers are starting to get very little usage. Rock is down to 1.3% usage. I am proud to say I'm probably a significant portion of that rock usage. We have Grass, Fighting, Normal all down below 3%, which is very little. That's actually less than most of the types in the rest of the that's less than the previous two iterations of the ladder. So we're starting to see a lot less variety in the low tiers, and the high tiers becoming a lot more present, which is kind of unfortunate. And this would be where I play a lot of, not a lot, maybe 4 or 5 types I'm currently really enjoying. I try to get into the 1600s. So I would be fighting a lot of Steel and Flying and Ghost, which it gets repetitive. It really does get quite boring fighting the same teams. And finally, we'll see on screen the 1700 ladder. And this is when things, in my opinion, get really bad. We see Flying instantly shoot up massively to the most used type. It actually jumped over 5% usage, which is crazy. Now, I do acknowledge 1760 is very high in the ladder, and not a huge amount of teams or players will be playing up this high. I think I probably only on average play one type this high in a generation. I typically get bored after the 1600s, and this is kind of why I get bored of seeing the same type variety over and over again. But up at this point, we see Flying used just shy of 15%, which is crazy because previously in 1630 we saw Steel at nearly 10%. There's a nearly 5% jump between that and Flying in this particular bracket of the ladder, which is pretty bad. It really does show that Flying is oppressively good at the high ladder to see this much usage. I don't think it's a question here that a ton of feathers is definitely more viable than a ton of rocks. Steel as well is significantly over 10% with 11.6%. We see the next few types, Water, Psychic, and Fairy. To be fair, it's kind of different to see Psychic and Fairy this high compared to the Dragon, Ghost, Bug we saw a lot in previous brackets, but even still, they're definitely eclipsed by how much we see Flying and Steel being used. In fact, the usage of Flying and Steel combined is over 25%. It's 26.6%, which is really bad. Over 1/4 of the meta this high is dominated by only 2 types, which I would argue does not make for a very interesting meta. I said earlier, and I have to acknowledge the fact, it's impossible to have a meta that's terribly balanced. Like, not every type is going to be used equal amounts, but we look here at the bottom tier. The bottom 3 types are used less than 2% of the time. In fact, Rock is used less than 1% of the time. Rock sees a 0.75% usage. And people might be thinking, oh, would Rock not be really good at high level as a counter pick to Flying? I actually think Flying goes even, if not beats, Rock this generation, just by how good some of the options are. We have Celesteela, Corviknight, Landorus, and Rock just simply doesn't have the tools to reliably destroy that onslaught of Pokemon. So unfortunately, I think at peak performance, Rock does struggle. As well as that, normal and fighting used by less than 2% of the time is pretty bad when we look at the top tiers being used over 10%. We also have a standard deviation here of 3.767%, which is extremely high and really shows the difference in how unbalanced the top tier is. So I mentioned earlier I'd be looking more at the 1500s, and the reason I chose this particular band of the monotype meta is because I think, number one, it's where a lot of players play. I don't think the high to top ladder is necessarily a very good representation of most players, and low ladder as well is a lot of beginners or people who are trying out new things. So I feel like 1500, the kind of high mid ladder, is a good or a better representation of what a lot of players play and what a lot of my teams are. So with that in mind, I wanted to look at the previous 4 months usage stats and kind of give you a quick graphical demonstration of what the meta looks like. So I don't think it's very good practice statistically to just look at one set of data. So with that in mind, I did look back to March, February and January as well to try and show you the state of the meta and honestly how little it's been budging. So on the screen we'll see here pie charts of the 4 months, and we can see water is completely dominant in all of them. Granted, it's been slowly falling down. It's gone from 12.2% usage in January to 9.2% last month in April. However, that said, we are still seeing quite a big usage in water, and it's still number 1 of the top 5. As well as that, the rest of the 4 types in the top 5 just simply aren't budging. We see Steel, Ghost, Dragon and Bug every time in the top 5. The positions do shift slightly, and I will say there is a tiny bit more variance or a bit more variety. As we see here in January, we have a 5.7% usage of all other types, while here in April we have 59.8% usage of all other types. Now, it's not great. I still think 5 types dominating over 40% of the meta is not a good look in my opinion. I would like to see a lot more type variety. Maybe if this was like 7 types, I would be pretty happy. 7 or 8 types, I would definitely be happy to dominate over 40%, but 5 types is a bit little in my opinion, and I do feel it gets very boring. Now, there's definitely an argument to be made that there is probably a lot of variety within these types, that, you know, despite the fact the same 3, 4, or 5 types are dominating, we'll see a lot of different usage within those types. Now, unfortunately, that's not really the case. We can see that here. Here is the usage stats for water. We see that 74.8% of water teams are using Pelipper, with 59% Urshifu, 41% Seismitoad and Tapu Fini, and 39% Kingdra. Now, these are far from the worst, and sadly enough to say, it's probably actually the most variety we've seen within the top tiers. But we still do see a hugely dominant playstyle in water, with Pelipper being used almost 75% of the time, which is quite a lot. If we jump here to Steel, it's looking a lot worse. We have 98% usage in Heatran, so essentially every time you run into Mono Steel, which we can already see is a lot of the time, you're going to be fighting Heatran. And Heatran does have a few sets it can run. If I really wanted to get deep into this, I can see, you know, Heatran's usage on Air Balloon versus maybe Specs or Scarf and stuff, but I don't think it's that deep. The fact is we're seeing Heatran a lot of the time. As well as that, we're seeing a ton of Aegislash with 78.9%, a lot of Excadrill 73%, Ferrothorn 66%, and Melmetal 58%. So these usages are very high, so over half the amount of Steel games you're going to be seeing the majority of these Pokemon, so even the type variety isn't massive. And it shouldn't come as any surprise that Dragon isn't going to be a huge amount better, though definitely a small bit, but not great. We still see 89% uses for Dragon Ball, 80% for Garchomp, Kyurem at 68%, and these are some Pokemon that really are really strong and some teams really struggle with, so especially lower tiers, it is kind of annoying. Now, I'm very surprised, I will say, with Dragon to not see Dragonite higher. I think that thing is pretty fantastic on a Dragon team, but that's not really here nor there. So I feel like I'm fighting the same teams over and over again, especially for something like Rock. And I know I keep coming back to Rock, but it's just my favorite type to play at the moment. It definitely struggles with Water and Steel, honestly. There's an argument to be made it struggles with Bug too, and I think these top tier types do maybe gatekeep some of the weaker types from being used a lot in the higher ladders, which is unfortunate. And I do like the challenge, don't get me wrong, I'm not complaining that I can't win. It's more just the sake of I found it boring to fight the same types over and over again. I don't see this really changing much between now and the end of Generation 8. I think, if anything, the only trend I see going upwards is maybe Steel getting better. I don't think the Council are going to ban things or really have anything on their radar to ban. I think the meta is kind of settling now, and we'll see a lot more usage of things like Steel in the future, and potentially Flying, since it's so good in the top tier. Potentially, maybe a lot of high level players will start to bleed down into the lower tiers and show how Flying is so good, and we can potentially see more Flying in the future. So, with all that said, that's kind of just my thoughts right now on the statistics. And personally, while I'm just lost interest in Generation 8, that's normal. I think every monotype generation to date has kind of become a bit stale or boring towards me towards the end of its life cycle, which is fine. We have Generation 9 coming out, I think, sometime later this year, so hopefully that will bring a fresh new perspective to the meta. We also always have Nat decks, which I'm a big fan of and definitely enjoying more right now. So to answer a couple of questions, where does this go? What does this mean for the future of my content? No, I'm not going to stop making monotype content. I might slow down on making Showdown Lives and maybe discuss more about the meta if that's something people are interested in. I've also finished the OM series, so potentially I'll loop back around then and make some more OMs going forward. But what I want to do with the future definitely is a lot more monotype discussions, and I want to start doing a new series called Off Brand that some of you may have realized from earlier on in my videos. I've mentioned it a few times, so I will be hopefully in due time, when I have more time on my hands, when I'm not studying and not planning and traveling, to dedicate myself to a series like that, where I'm going to be playing the entire Monotype series again, but with a little bit of a twist. So hopefully you do look forward to that. And with that, a final note, I just want to say thank you for all the support I've had recently. There's definitely been a lot of growth on the channel the last few weeks, which is probably the worst possible time for me to take a break, but I just really needed it. I was starting to get a bit burnt out and very bored of the monotype meta. So if people are interested in this kind of stuff, definitely let me know down below in the comments. I really do appreciate it. It really helps me grow, and the growth lately has been much appreciated. I will get around to reading all the comments. Thank you so much as always. I hope to catch you next time, everyone, and take care.